Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Bold Woman Summit. Today, I have a very interesting guest. Her name is Christy Lingo, and she has a very particular subject which she's going to talk about today, and it's about ADHD. And she has made her life mission to support women, adult women, entrepreneurs who have ADHD. It was very interesting. We had a pre-meeting with her, and we talked about like different signs about it. And I definitely want to hear more about it. And turns out there are a lot of grown-ups who actually have also that what we consider to be as a children's issue, and there is things we need to be aware of if we have that, how we can support each other. And yeah, so Christy, hello.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. Maybe even be diagnosed with ADHD.
You
So
know,
tell
it's
me.
very prevalent. It's a lot more prevalent, especially in women, because, like you said, for so long it was thought of as something that little, like 10-year-old boys had, and that they grew out of when they got to be adults. And in the last 20 years, the research has just exploded in terms of what parts of the brain it affects, medications that can be used, other types of coping mechanisms that can be used to help you thrive in a world that isn't necessarily built for executive function dysfunction.
Yeah, but how did you end up doing that work, coaching ADHD mother entrepreneurs? What's
Yeah.
the story?
So I
Yeah,
started as an entrepreneur, as a professional organizer, actually. And as part of my professional organizing journey, I joined a group here in the United States called the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. And the purpose of this group is to help you as an organizer, as a counselor, as a psychologist, in helping different populations with organizing. And I myself had a couple of organizing clients that had ADHD. So, as a way to work with them, I would take these classes on how to organize for these special populations, because I didn't want to go in there and just assume that they would do things the way that I did them. And I wanted to make sure that I gave them useful habits that they could build. And while I'm taking these classes and learning more about ADHD, I start to like question myself and be like, a lot of these things sound very familiar, the inability to follow through on certain tasks, the getting distracted and forgetting about something, and then, realizing 2 hours later you were supposed to be cleaning the kitchen and now you're organizing your garage, those kinds of things. But I just kind of like put it on the back burner, because at that point in time, I didn't feel like it was impacting my life. Fast forward to the pandemic, when I lose a lot of the coping mechanisms that I had used for a long time. I no longer had the structure of getting up and getting my kids ready for school and then going to work, because I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't have obligations that I had to fulfill for people, which were giving me deadlines, which I didn't realize were so important to me. And I really started to feel like I was floundering a little bit, because I had kind of lost my coping mechanisms. I also happened to be homeschooling my kids at that point in time, and I started to notice a lot of the characteristics of hyperactive ADHD in my youngest son. And so when he started back into school, we actually had him evaluated for ADHD, because I knew from my studies that the earlier you can diagnose and start with some of these coping mechanisms, the better the outcome can be. And, you can get teachers on board. And if there needs to be, a counselor or a therapist or something like that, you can bring those people in. And when he got his diagnosis, it really inspired me to take my mental health seriously and at least find out, if it came back negative, it came back negative, no big deal. But if it did come back positive, I had that experience with the pandemic. I had these feelings like maybe this is something that I was experiencing. And so I went and got the diagnosis, and I'm so glad I did. Here I sit at 45, and now I look back at my life and think, I'm not regretful because I luckily did have a lot of coping mechanisms in place where I did okay in school. And, I was able to graduate from high school and graduate from college and, work jobs and be successful. But, a lot of these things, a lot of the reasons why ADHD is often missed in women is we find these coping mechanisms that help to mask it. And so while we're stressed out because we sit down to read a book and we have to read the same paragraph over and over 19 times, or we just can't seem to find the right organizing system that we can keep up with because we lose focus or we lose interest in it and we just want to start and recreate the wheel again. All of those things are because the ADHD brain seeks stimulation. And so you always are wanting something new, you're having trouble focusing. And so there's just a lot of these things that I'm kind of like, oh, well, that makes so much more sense now in my life, now that I understand how my brain operates a little bit differently from what we like to term a neurotypical brain. Like, we don't like to use the term normal because what is normal really, in the end. So there's this sort of neurotypical societal standards that have been set up as, this is what a good student looks like. This is what a successful life looks like. This is what productive looks like or focused looks like. And a lot of people with ADHD often operate outside of those parameters. And so understanding that about yourself and realizing that there's certain things that are going to take a little bit more effort on your part, or you're going to have a little bit more structure and routine in your life, can really open the doorway to helping you feel more confident, to helping you feel more successful, and to really feel like you're not abnormal or you're struggling. It's just you have to operate on a little bit different level.
Okay, sounds very interesting. You mentioned a lot of like these signs or symptoms what you had, but like when we go back to these symptoms, so how would I understand that I can I can maybe have that? That
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
relate to your story, like being like here and there and
Something new, something new, something new. It's like a squirrel brain is something that we call it here.
it's like the way I work best if I can like do one thing and then I just automatically switch and start to do something else, and then I get tired of it and then I do something else. So it's like that's how I've been. Like it's really difficult for me to focus on one task for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so the biggest thing is, and I want to put this out there, is if you feel like you have any sort of mental health, if it's anxiety or depression or ADHD or anything like that, talk to a health professional, because that is not who I am. I am somebody who works with people once they have gotten a diagnosis or they suspect they have a diagnosis, but I can't diagnose. What I can tell you is that in very general broad terms, ADHD is a lack of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain that helps with your prefrontal cortex in the front of your brain and what's called executive function. Executive function is things like being able to focus on a task for long periods of time, being able to start a task. So maybe wanting to take on a new project or something like that. Organization, working memory, like short-term memory type things. So if a thought comes into your head, being able to hold on to that thought until you have a chance to act on it or write it down on a piece of paper. These tend to be things that people with ADHD struggle with. And like you were saying, how you like to jump from task to task, new stimulus creates dopamine. So your body is telling you, I need some dopamine right now. And you're like, you know what I should do? I should try something different. And immediately you're going to be able to focus on that because your brain has just gotten a shot of dopamine and other things that, sugar can cause you to get a dopamine rush. Exercise can cause you to have a dopamine rush. Alcohol and drugs obviously can cause you to have a dopamine rush. And so that's what your brain, why you're seeking this new stimulus potentially could be that your brain is like, hey, I need to hit a dopamine right now. Can you do something for me to give me that I need? And so that's kind of how a therapist might talk you through different scenarios when they're diagnosing you and say, like, what is your reaction to this? My personal diagnosis took about an hour and a half with a psychologist, and she asked me all different kinds of questions about all different areas of my life, and then fit them into a diagnosis for me. And it related to a lot of the stuff that I mentioned with executive function, how I reacted in different situations. Did my brain ever feel overwhelmed by things? Did I ever use procrastination as a way to motivate myself to do things? And that was like how I got through college. Was I would wait till the very last minute to do a lot of projects because I would work so much better if I waited till the very end to do it. And that, again, procrastination, that anxiety that you're getting from being like pressured to do something, it's a dopamine hit. So
Oh my God. It's like, okay. So if one gets the diagnosis from the professional clinical psychologist or who are the ones who are doing that, so what are the next steps if I'm having the feeling that there is a lot of resemblance? So what I can do already, being a mother, entrepreneur, multitasker.
yeah, yeah. There are, I call them coping strategies or coping mechanisms. And they could be things like it's very important to build structure and routine into your day because making decisions exhausts your executive function. So if you can do things like I always do the same tasks in the same order in the morning, it takes the decision making out of your system or out of your day. And so then it doesn't exhaust your executive function as much. That way, when you would sit down to work or you would need to do something with your family, you need to write a grocery list or something like that, your brain hasn't been tapped out by making a bunch of decisions prior to that. Using a calendar or a schedule to block out your time, while it feels like, people with ADHD often don't like structure, but they need structure. So that's kind of the catch 22 is that they feel very confined by structure because they want to be a free spirit and they want to be spontaneous, and that's what makes people with ADHD super fun and creative. But at the same time, they really need that structure. So find a calendar system that works for you. It could be pen and paper. It could be something on your phone. It could be a desk calendar, whatever works. But find a way to schedule out your day because I call it my external brain. I need to get anything that's in here out onto some sort of paper, whether it's a calendar or a to-do list, or I do every morning a brain dump, just anything that's kind of running around my head, ideas for TikToks, quotes that I heard, a show that I want to watch, a podcast I want to listen to. I'll just sit down in the morning and just blah, 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 write that all down because then I know that I have a list to go back to reference. And I got it out of my head. And again, getting all those thoughts that race around in your head out onto a piece of paper helps to clear it up so you can sit down and do focused work. Do you need to write a blog post? Do you need to get on a Zoom call for your work? Is there some sort of focused work that you need to do, within your family? Are there things that you need to do for your family? Do you need to pay the bills and things like that? It will help to clear up any space, anything you have running around that might interrupt your focus process.
Okay, very interesting. So I have a little bit maybe deeper question with that.
Okay.
Like you said, that they don't really like structure. So how would I if I how do I get myself to the place if there is a resistance? Then and yeah, like with this resistance, I don't notice. I have done a lot of work with that by myself, but it's like forgetfulness happens if you have
Mm-hmm.
resistance.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely.
how we can get rid of these sabotages that I don't want to do it, so I forget it.
Yeah. So I find myself when I run into that resistance, and this was something that I did prior to even knowing that I have ADHD, and now it really comes in handy when I start to feel that resistance, is I like to find my why. So what is the purpose of this thing that I want to do? So if I understand the importance of it, why I need to do this thing, then sometimes I can find it within myself to motivate or get started on that project. I can find the motivation to follow through with the things that I need. So for instance, let's just take that scheduling structured schedule idea. You know, the idea of like time blocking your day or doing something like that. Um, and again, it's going to look different for everybody. What works for me won't necessarily work for you. And it may take a couple of tries to figure out what sort of calendar or time blocking you need to do. But think of why it would be important. I'm tired of being late for things. I'm tired of missing deadlines for projects. I'm tired of sitting down at 6 o'clock at night and feeling like I've wasted my day because I got stuck in a term that we use in ADHD is time blindness, where you like sit down and 4 hours later you're still looking at Instagram. You know, these sorts of things happen, and I don't want those things to happen again. So journal on that, write about it, type it out, talk it out. You don't necessarily have to write to journal. You can talk it into your phone or into a microphone and just kind of marinate on the idea of like, I really hate the idea of having my day run by my calendar, but at the same time, I really am tired of paying late bills on or late fees on my bills because I don't have any sort of calendar that tells me when those things are due. I'm tired of people not thinking of me as reliable because I don't follow through on these projects that I say I'm going to do. I'm tired of, I work specifically with mom business owners. I'm tired of my business not being successful because I'm not making the time for the things that I need to be doing. So when you kind of wrap your brain around why, it's a good way to talk yourself into some of these things that feel very anti what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah, great. So, but let's say you mentioned also that your son also has ADHD.
Mhm.
My son, the older son, also has that same, and he was kind of diagnosed. He was like borderline
Yeah, yeah.
diagnosed when he was 8 years old. Um, and I know many mothers who are dealing with that issue, and it can be quite like challenging because there are a lot to handle, as
They
I
are.
so even if I'm not the ADHD mother myself, like children, how do you like probably the same things with us, but like what
Yep.
are like for me, I remember the most difficult thing was probably not being reactive or
Yeah.
because they really trigger with their person, they like the way they are. So
Yep, yep. There's actually a term, it's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. And it is something a lot, you see it in autism, you see it in ADHD, and a lot of neurodivergent populations suffer from this. And it's this idea that when somebody yells at you or tells you that you're doing something wrong, you have a tendency to not be able to brush it off as easily as some people. And I know a lot of people deal with this kind of thing, but there's when you're dealing with RSD from an ADHD or an autism standpoint, from a neurodivergent population, you really internalize it. You might marinate on that incident for days, even if it isn't even that big of a deal. And so you're absolutely right. You have to kind of stifle your reactions to things. That are negative. So try to understand, I recommend reading as much as you can about how an ADHD brain operates and coping strategies, because what works for one family isn't necessarily going to work for somebody else. But there's so much information that's out there on the internet, in books, on YouTube, on podcasts. There's a lot of information that's out there. But for us, So structure, again, we have a very clear morning routine that we go through every morning, so he knows exactly what to expect. I'm not throwing anything new at him. We try to keep it very consistent every morning. We keep checklists. Oh my God, the number of checklists that I have around my house: checklist for soccer, checklist for swimming, checklist for walking out the door to go to school. But what that does is it sits by the door and it says, okay, what do we have? Do we have our backpack? Do we have our shoes on? Do we have our coat? Do we have our gloves? And it seems like it would be so silly that something of that you would forget. But the number of times that I would get in the car to go to school and my kid would be like, oh my gosh, I'm cold, I don't have my coat on. But it's just their brains get to move so fast that they forget these very, what seems very logical or very basic things. So now we have a checklist that we keep by our door, and we run down the checklist. And even my older son, who doesn't have ADHD or executive function issues, he likes to go through it because he's like, now I don't forget my lunch, or I don't forget these other things. And so, any sort of ways that you can find to make them feel more confident, because self-confidence is a huge issue, especially with younger kids that have ADHD, because they're used to being yelled at for being disruptive. They're used to being yelled at for not living up to their potential. They're used to feeling like a failure because they forget something or they do something wrong. And so finding ways that we can support these kids to help them to feel confident and help them to thrive is really the most important thing. And like I said, there is just a plethora of information out there. If you try something and it doesn't work for your family, go back to the drawing board. Somebody else is going to have something that might work for you, or you can just kind of zhuzh it a little bit to make it work for you.
That sounds good. Yeah. Is there like any practice or exercise what we can do even together with our children? Because like something what can ground us, being ADHD or being the mother of ADHD child. What are like maybe simple practice what we could do now for to just like
Yep. So this is something that I actually created before I started working with ADHD populations, but boundaries are super important for moms, for women, for anybody that's in the workforce, setting a boundary, which, first of all, boundaries does not mean that you say no to everything. What it does is it sets up a guideline for how you would like people to treat you and how you would like to operate. And so what I like to do is to set up a boundary permission statement, which means that you give yourself permission to set this boundary. And then it gives you a very real phrase that you can use to communicate that boundary with whoever is affected by it. And when it comes to ADHD, the reason why boundaries are important is we have a tendency to say yes a lot. We have a tendency to take on more tasks than we can handle. We have a tendency to overfill our schedules because we like to be spontaneous. We like to say yes. We tend to be people pleasers, right? So regardless of if you have ADHD or you're just a mom that likes to say yes to things, figuring out your value system and then attaching some boundaries to those things can be super helpful. So it's 3 steps. So the first thing that I recommend you do is figure out where it is that you need to set a boundary. Do you need to set a boundary in your physical space? Like, I need to shut the door when I sleep at night. I need to shut the door while I'm working. Those kinds of things. It could be a boundary around your time. So you want to protect so that you don't feel overwhelmed by your schedule, or you don't feel like you're just running all over for your kids all the time and not taking any time for yourself. Or it could be a boundary around your tasks, which means that you're not, accepting to do coworkers' work, or you're not taking on more than you can handle at your job, or even with your family, like you're the only person that cleans up the entire house, setting a boundary around, okay, this is what I will do, but the rest of you have to help me with the rest of the stuff. So the first thing is to set up where it is that you need this boundary. And then the second thing, back to that idea of a why, is what is the reason that you want to create this boundary? What are the feelings that you're feeling inside? How will this make a difference in your life? So find that reason. And then the next thing is identifying how you know that you are approaching a limit, because a lot of times lack of boundaries leads to burnout, which is something that I hear from moms all the time, that they are just burned to a crisp. We have put ourselves out there for our kids, for our spouses, for our jobs, for our extended family, whoever it is, that we're just tapped out. We have nothing left to give. So think about where you don't have a boundary and why it is that you feel like you need this anxiety, the pitter patter that you feel in your heart, or the pit that you feel in your stomach. Or I used to have a lot of anxiety with a job that I worked before I started my organizing business. And I would feel like I constantly had to go to the bathroom when I would have interactions with these coworkers. And I think that was my body telling me, like, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to put a boundary in place here. It was physically manifesting itself. So what are those ways that your body is telling you that you need to put this boundary in place? And so from that, you create your statement. I give myself permission to insert the boundary because insert the reason for the boundary. And I no longer want to feel. What was that reason? What were those feelings that you were having that were causing you to want to put this boundary in place? So, for instance, I give myself permission to grab drinks with my girlfriends on a monthly basis because nurturing these friendships makes me feel better about myself and my life as a mother. And I no longer want to feel like the social lives of my children are more important than my own. So something like that. So then you've got a concise, clear statement that you can take to your partner or your spouse or to whoever is going to be affected by this. And you say, if you're laying out the reasons, if you're laying out the feelings behind those reasons, it is just a way that you can clearly and calmly communicate this need to them versus tapping yourself out, burning yourself out, starting to feel resentful, starting to feel angry, hate washing the dishes at night because you're like, I'm the only person that ever does the dishes in this house, those kinds of things. And so it allows you to kind of cut those angry feelings off before they start.
Yeah. So it really is about us getting real and sitting down and saying, okay, how long I'm going to go with that way?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And this is an exercise that, like I said, regardless of if you have ADHD, which boundaries are super important for ADHD, but any of us as moms, as women, we tend to say yes, even if we're not moms. We just have a tendency to want to be people pleasers. And so finding those places where you can start to set boundaries and then confidently communicate those boundaries with the affected people will go so far in helping you to stave off any burnout that you might endure as a mom, as a business owner, as a human.
Very good. Thank you. I know you have a gift for our audience also. Can you a little bit tell
Yeah.
us about that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the exercise that I just did, I've put together a little workbook for anybody who would like to pick it up. It's called Set Boundaries, Stop Burnout. And it just kind of takes you through why it is that you need to set boundaries, what a boundary can do to help you stop burnout. It helps you to brainstorm some ideas around your space, your time, and your tasks, and then set up your own boundary permission statement. And then you can go back to this. The great thing about having it in writing and having it where you can go print it is 6 months from now, you might be like, oh yeah, I remember that girl. She talked about the boundary permission statement. I feel like I need to revisit that. I feel like I need to set up a boundary with this person or in this area of my life, and you can revisit it. And so it just kind of walks you through those steps and gives you a workbook that you can fill out so that you can set up these boundaries to help stop burnout.
Sounds good. Go definitely and check it out. Print it out, like Christy just said. We were just in Spa with my friend, and we were discussing that how it's like she's saying that really need to have a printer at the house, because if these worksheets stay in your computer, then you forget them.
Yes, it's so easy. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. So find a way to print it out and do this exercise, because there is really no magic pill in coming out of this people pleasing habit than just practicing different way. Yeah. So thank you, Christy, for coming and sharing. It was such an interesting thing. Also, everybody, our Facebook group is a private group. It's for this community who has come together to this summit. So if you felt related also with this ADHD theme, then you can share that there. I mean, it's great to have a feeling that I'm not alone in this. And so definitely go there and, like I just said that, okay, I have issues with this and this, and I think I have that. Oh my God.
Yeah. There's such a calming feeling in knowing that you aren't alone in these feelings that you have, or in this way that your brain operates when you feel like you're the only person. So absolutely, I 100% say find that community, go into that community and find the people that are feeling that same way, and you'll feel less alone.
And what I wanted to say in the end also is that a long time I kind of felt that there is something wrong with me, that I'm like not normal, that
Mhm.
everybody seemed to have it all together, and I'm constantly struggling with focus and putting my energy into one place and completing tasks, and it is really important, the way part is to understand that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just different.
It's just different. Absolutely. And I think that there's something freeing in understanding that.
Yeah, and accepting it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So, well, thank you very much, Christy, for coming and sharing your knowledge. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.